This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful presence and run your business. Squarespace allows you to create a powerful online identity for yourself, your brand, or your business. Indeed, this is something I recently did for our companion podcast, where David and I, who run this channel together, talk at length about the sort of things you learn about on this show. You can find that podcast and see our beautiful Squarespace website at brainfood.fm. Check that out if you want to. So on Squarespace, it all starts with a beautiful template that you can customize to your heart is content, or you can start from scratch if you're feeling brave and you're design inclined, and you can also move over an existing domain. It makes everything super easy to manage. Now, I'm totally rubbish at design, so I definitely used a beautiful Squarespace template and knocked something out that looks pretty good, if I might say so myself, in a couple of hours. And you know, it looks good despite my complete lack of skills. And once you've gone through this super easy customization process, there are no updates, there's no patches, there's no tech BS to deal with. No one likes tech BS. And Squarespace also handle all that website-y stuff. They do podcasts, as you know, that's where we host, mailing lists, social integrations, and much, much more. Also, Squarespace has 24/7 customer support. They're there to help you whenever you have a question. Now, Squarespace isn't just about an online presence. You can totally sell stuff or services through a Squarespace site. Look, if you're looking to start a business, pursue a dream, do a podcast, whatever, just do it with Squarespace. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/brainfood and you'll save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Now let's get into it, shall we? In the world of food advertising, there's a concept known as propping, which is just industry jargon for making the food look as good as possible via sometimes rather, shall we say, unusual means. While proper lighting and setting are a given, a great food stylist, which is a thing by the way, will do much more than that. For example, it's common practice when shooting meat to lightly spray it with oil to give the illusion that it's plump, juicy, and fresh from the oven, when in reality it may be several days old and already beginning to rot when an advertising picture is taken of it. For example, consider this quote from professional food stylist Emma Feigenbaum about a Thanksgiving shoot that she did. "I was doing a Thanksgiving dinner shoot for a clothing advertisement, and we made 3 turkeys at the beginning of the 4-day shoot. We had to leave them outside, and every day that they didn't use them, we had to juice them back up and make the turkeys look like new. When they finally put the turkeys on the table, they smelled so bad that everyone was gagging." Propping is an open secret in the advertising industry, and the food stylists responsible for the glamour shots you see of everything from Big Macs to bottles of beer are in high demand. Now, your first instinct might be to say that this all sounds, well, mighty deceptive, and in fact, well, it can be, which is part of why professional food stylists can command such a premium for their services. Paying someone who knows how close to the knuckle they can get without technically breaking any rules and getting the company they contracted with in trouble, even when costing obscene prices for the work actually done, is a hell of a lot cheaper than facing a massive lawsuit or the FTC coming down hard on your company, as we are going to get into shortly. For now, if you're wondering, the American Association of Advertising Agencies notes that a typical 30-second commercial shoot for a restaurant costs on average around $500,000. Using this same price per 30 seconds for a 2-hour movie, that's a budget of about $120 million, which, while cheap for certain types of huge blockbuster movies with massive amounts of special effects, is pretty expensive on the whole, especially when you consider the crew doing a restaurant commercial does not need extensive, elaborate sets, travel budgets, massive crews and support staff, food budgets spanning months, advanced special effects, and, well, the list goes on to a ridiculous degree. As for the top food stylist crews in the business, they tend to earn much more than that for the same shoot, and in all cases, pro food stylists pay attention to a lot of tiny details pretty much everyone who watches the commercial will completely miss. For example, Gay Benson notes for Doritos commercials, they would go through numerous bags to collect the perfect set of chips to shoot. When filming for McDonald's, they literally count the sesame seeds on various buns to find one with whatever amount and distribution was considered optimal for the shots that they were taking. So going back to the rules and the pro food stylists that are so good at stopping just short of the line that would get the company that hired them in trouble, according to an expert in advertising law called Stuart Friedel, when it comes to advertising food, there are, to quote, a million nuances, but essentially 2 rules. The most pertinent to today's topic being that you cannot misrepresent the product. What constitutes misrepresentation, of course, is a matter of some debate and more a shades of grey type of thing rather than just black and white. For the curious, the second rule is that you cannot simulate the product in use without indicating that it is a simulation, which, according to Friedel, is why when you watch ads about TVs and the like, there's almost always a disclaimer saying that the image on screen is a simulation. In specific regards to food, stylists and prop masters dressing food for ads have to be exceptionally careful to not do anything to the food that could be construed as a deliberate attempt to misrepresent it. Even still, there is a lot a particularly savvy photographer can do to make the food look good without crossing the line. For example, let's say you're taking a picture of a burrito and the tortilla keeps flopping around. Replacing the burrito with a bit of stiff fabric is illegal, and apparently taking the time to perfectly wrap a burrito so that it doesn't flop is just too much effort for a small crew only getting paid $500,000 to do a few-day shoot and some pre- and post-production work. However, gluing the tortilla shut isn't illegal at all, and it's workarounds like this that are why food stylists get paid the big bucks. Of course, as bad as spraying 4-day-old meat with oil and gluing burritos together might sound, back in the 1960s, the world of food advertising was basically the Wild West. Tricks like using motor oil in lieu of syrup were commonplace and completely legal. In fact, in many cases, stuff like this was preferable to using the real thing because it lasted longer and was easier to shoot. Another trick is to use mashed potatoes covered in resin or Crisco as a stand-in for ice cream. After all, ice cream melts pretty quick, particularly when subjected to being closely lit, and photo shoots sometimes last a long time. Using the real product simply was much harder than faking it, especially when you need a consistent look from shot to shot. Speaking of shoots lasting a long time, if you want to make a drink look cold, according to the aforementioned Feigenbaum, when I'm making cocktails or other drinks for a shoot, I spray on this glycerin mix and it suddenly looks cold. Plus, it doesn't go away and won't leave fingerprints. Or if you'd like some gooey melted chocolate, using actually melted chocolate is going to be a pain to shoot and keep consistent. Instead, as Steve Gerald notes, we sometimes use fake chocolate, this borax gel that's the same stuff they use to make slime. You add brown food coloring to it and cocoa powder and it looks like chocolate, except you don't have to worry about it cooling down or melting. It just stays the perfect consistency. Alright, so what does Campbell's Soup have to do with all of this stuff? Well, in 1968, a New York-based advertising company called BBDO were contracted by the company to create an ad for their new chicken and stars soup. While shooting the ad, BBDO art director Robson Ballantyne noted that the vegetables in the soup kept sinking to the bottom of the bowl, which he felt was ruining the shot. After trying and failing to pour the soup in a way that would correct this, Ballantyne simply put clear glass marbles in the bottom of the bowl. The idea being, in this case, that the chunks of vegetable would sit on top of the marbles and remain visible. Initially, nobody was all that bothered by this because, as noted, it was standard practice in the industry at the time to do stuff like this. But it's not like this was even close to the worst thing advertisers were doing at the time. So, well, why did this spur a massive shift in law concerning advertising? Well, there's an old saying in the advertising industry that the only person who pays as much attention to your ads as you do is your competition. This is something the Campbell's Soup Company learned firsthand when H.J. Heinz Company, known for their many sauces but also a maker of soups, filed a complaint with the FTC about Campbell's putting marbles in their soup to make it look like it contained more ingredients than it did. Now, Heinz themselves, of course, allegedly did similar things in shooting their own various products, but this was hardly the point. Mostly this just seemed a way to jab at their rival. Heinz reportedly also sent the FTC a bunch of corroborating evidence against Campbell's Soup during the subsequent probe. Campbell's Soup were understandably rather annoyed about this, and a few years later returned the favor by kindly alerting the FTC to the fact that Heinz's ketchup contained mold, apparently. In 1979, Heinz jabbed back using the age-old practice of, if you can't beat 'em, sue 'em, suing Campbell's for having a monopoly on canned soup. At the time, Campbell's had an 85% market share on canned soup. In any event, going back to the whole marbles thing, during a meeting with the United States Federal Trade Commission, the head of BBDO's art department ultimately explained to them that we want to make the food look as good as it actually is. For example, we put marbles in the soup to force the vegetables to the top of the bowl. This was a statement that prompted a stunned FTC official to ask incredulously, "Marbles in the soup?" Needless to say, this wasn't going well already. Nevertheless, it is worth noting that throughout the case, Campbell's Soup and BBDO maintained that they'd done nothing wrong. This was a sentiment echoed by many others in the industry who didn't work for Heinz. As E.E. Norris noted wryly, "The only law we thought we were breaking was the law of gravity. It all seemed perfectly legitimate to us." Vincent Meehan, who was also involved in this particular marbles debacle, further went on, "What we did with the marbles was purely and simply to prop the ingredients. We did not add ingredients to make the soup have more ingredients than it was supposed to have." Of course, one might argue that it did seem to imply there were more ingredients, so much so that they brimmed to the top, a position that seemingly the FTC agreed with. Nevertheless, Campbell's Soup fought the case valiantly in court, pointing out a reasonably good counter-argument that the act of putting marbles in their soup was technically less deceptive than not, since not doing so made the soup look like it contained only liquid. But this didn't work, and FTC charged BBDO and Campbell's Soup with deceptive advertising. The matter might have dropped from there if not for the general public's subsequent outrage when they found out about it a year later. Most influential among those unhappy with their soup looking decidedly more liquid in real life was an organization known as the Students Opposed to Unfair Practices, or SOUP, formed in 1970 by a group of law students at George Washington University. They argued that simply pulling deceptive ads, as the FTC had ordered, wasn't enough. After all, the advertisement had already worked its magic to some extent. They felt that Campbell's should have to run new ads explicitly explaining their deception and showing what the real product looked like. While the FTC dismissed the group initially, within a year, FTC officials adopted their own version of the idea that Soup was advocating for, namely something that came to be known as corrective advertising. Essentially, in especially egregious cases of deceptive advertising in the future, the FTC now had the power to order any company who they felt had crossed the line to issue new ads explaining their deception. Other penalties that might be levied included simply a ban on advertising a certain product at all for some set amount of time, or both of these at the same time. Even though the FTC never ordered them to make such a correction, the threat of them doing so made the company drop that specific practice like, to quote one source on the matter, a red-hot spoon. By 1972, the FTC in turn had dropped the case against Campbell's. The damage, it was done though, and advertisers quickly stopped many of the existing deceptive practices that were being used to advertise food in the hopes of avoiding earning the ire of both the FTC and the public. In the long run, however, this mostly just forced food stylists to make the food in ads look especially delicious to get ever more creative in how to do their jobs. For example, if you're wondering to get around rules about putting marbles in the bottom of bowls of soup to make the solid ingredients more visible, food stylists today typically put soup in comically shallow bowls and frame the photos in ways that hides this fact from the viewers. On top of that, another common trick is to simply scoop the soup into a shallow ladle or spoon and overlay it above the bowl to hide most of the bowl's contents, thus making the non-liquid contents of the soup extremely prominent to the viewer. And now for a bonus fact. Ever wondered what the 57 in 57 varieties of Heinz means? Well, want to know more? By 1892, H.J. Heinz Company had grown from a small company selling horseradish in clear glass jars, something Henry Heinz started doing at the age of around 10 years old when his parents gave him 3/4 of an acre of land to start a business with, to having a decent-sized company selling over 60 products. It was at this time that the business instituted their now famous 57 varieties of Heinz slogan. Heinz had come up with the slogan while riding on a train in New York City in 1892. While on the train, he spotted a shoe store advertisement that was promoting their 21 styles of shoes. He thought his company should have a similar slogan promoting the fact that they produced many different products. Rather than go with the exact number of products they made at the time, which would continue to grow to nearly 6,000 today, he instead chose 57. According to H.J. Heinz Company, he chose this number simply because he thought it was a lucky number and he liked the sound of 57 varieties of Heinz. It was also reasonably close to the number of products that they actually produced at the time, so they just went with it. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe. Also, hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed it. It lets us know that you did. Also, I've got another channel. It's called Highlight History. It's relatively new. You will find that linked to below. It's sort of a day in history sort of thing in the same style as this. Please do check that out if you think you could be interested. And as always, thank you for watching.